Okay, good afternoon. And today's talk will be on science fiction film and India. Now, science fiction is a popular genre, and as it is in the case of Hollywood, as it is in the case of in the West, the popularity that we find, the big budget film, and the message of a futuristic world, we find that in India also films are being made keeping in mind that very popular genre science fiction, but not up to that very level. Here in India, science fiction films are of course made, but still it is a kind of a growing phase, I must say. It is a kind of a genre that needs more improvement, that requires more critical attention, that requires more investment, of course. And those who are more and more enthusiastic in a genre like science fiction in Indian films. Now, regarding science fiction and Indian films, if there is a kind of an initial imbalance regarding the choice of regarding the attention of the audience, because the audience, global audience, are more keen. Global audience, they are more keen on the on the science fiction films made by Hollywood than on the Indian films. Often they are made in Hindi or in regional languages, but still Indian films, it may be in the Bombay, Bollywood, or in other regional locations. Still, they are gradually trying to make some adventurous attempts in this particular genre that we call science fiction film. And but still, as the critics' opinion are there, that they are of the opinion that the critics are saying that the directors, they need to come out of a comfort zone. Actually, the kind of common taste the Indians have, the kind of masala movies that people still are of the they have the very great choice in case of Indian context. So regarding the number of audience, it is of course not up to that very level. And if it is one kind of observation by the critics, film critics of our time, on the other hand, directors are of course seen not to come out from their comfort zone. They are often seen that they are more comfortable in a particular atmosphere that they are very much used to working with Indian audience. The kind of song, the kind of dance, the kind of romance narrative that Indian audience would like to watch more and more, the kind of unhappy ending and the kind of the social causes, social situations, social upheavals, which are very common in most of the Indian films. So they are not very much seen to be interested in watching science fiction films which are made in India in that sense. But those few films which are being made till now, they show the highly researched, uh, you know, activity on the part of the director, on the part of the filmmaker, that they have also attempted to do some great job uh, trying to make a kind of a balance, the kind of scientific researches in one hand, and on the other hand, the social acceptance. Social acceptability is something that is very necessary while making films, particularly science fiction films in Indian context. But those science fiction films which are made till now, we find the very common test that is necessary in Indian context, and this one is that sense of entertainment. it is not seen actually in global platform or the same science fiction films which are being made in the Western countries or particularly in Hollywood. But in case of India, when science fiction, the narrative comes in one side of the whole platform of that particular film. On the other hand, the sense of entertainment, sense of dance, song, music, and a kind of romance, both are actually also entertained, and those are blended beautifully by the part of the filmmaker has to keep in mind that what do the audience want in Indian context. So he is always in a kind of a mental tussle. He is always in a kind of a psychological trauma in that sense, whether the audience will really like his newly made scientific science fiction film or not. So this entertainment package, and on the other hand, the research work that would like to talk about the science fiction advancement in that way. So he has to keep a balance in both ways. On the other hand, social issues are something that can never be avoided. Social issues are very much there. Social issues are to be mentioned categorically. So, Indian science fiction film means a lot of homework, a lot of anxiety, of course, and a lot of researches in that sense, whether the audience will like it or they won't like. So this is how, on this particular way, critics, audience, directors, filmmakers, they have their various opinions. Now, if we think of science fiction films which are made in Indian context, then we need to go back to 1952. And we find that in some cases, South India is very much advanced in making science fiction films. In 1952 came the Tamil film Kadu, and Kadu was a kind of a really a good project because it was a joint venture by the Indian and the American production houses. And then in 1963 came Kalai Arsi, again a Tamil film. And in 1967, came Chaad Par Charai. So look how the early science fiction films were actually in a very nascent stage, and they were struggling to invite audience in the theater houses, in the yes, and the film houses, and but they are actually trying to grow a taste in the mind of the audience. So it was never a very light job at all. Rather, it was something that was very critical, very subtle, and it demanded lots of dedication on the part of the filmmakers. The Alien science fiction film that came in the 1960s, uh, ultimately it was not successful a project was, but we find Satyajit Ray, was also trying to get into that particular uh, whole project. And later we find that Satyajit Ray in 1967, one story that is written in Bangla, Bonku Babur Bondhu, the friend of Bonku Babu, uh, another script was also made, and that was a script of a science fiction film. So this is how things were actually going on. And we find that, of course, some hurdles had to face the directors. When the directors are ready, producers were not there. And in most cases, the tension and the anxiety regarding the acceptance, social acceptance of such kind of films were always there. And at the same time, we need to think of the audience and all those science fiction discussion that is very common in case of Hollywood. We find in Indian context such kind of discussion, such kind of consciousness those are not actually same. Now, education in India is, of course, an issue. The way people are more educated in Western countries and they have a separate knack or a habit to know what is happening around, and that advancement for science fiction or such kind of adapted films based on science fictions, literature. So the kind of growing consciousness they have in the West, in case of Indian context, we don't find such kind of response from the common mass, because the majority of the people, they don't have any idea at all regarding science fiction film, and only a handful are there to know, to research, to be curious about science fiction films. Now, few films really were very, very popular. One is Mr. India. Mr. India, of course, was a very popular science fiction film. However, as I have mentioned already, uh, being 100% focused on science fiction issues wouldn't work in Indian context. And the director has to keep in mind that along with science fiction message, he has to arrange for that masala movie, that, the kind of emotional experience on the part of the characters, on the part of the protagonist. So gradually it will be a kind of that another layer of the film, because if one layer doesn't work, the another layer probably, of course, will work. That is the intention of the director. Now, in Mr. India, that was very popular at that very time, and it deals primarily with that not so explored zone of Bollywood. This one is the science fiction film. Now, when we think of a film like this, we find that one character who gets uh, invisible, regarding that invisibility that creates so many uproar, and that makes the whole texture of the narrative complex gradually. And because of that texture, uh, it worked well. It really helped a lot, to make such kind of consciousness on the part of the audience, and they tested it well, and they opined their views well on that particular movie, Mr. India. Now, another movie that has to be mentioned in this context is Koi Mil Gaya. Now, Koi Mil Gaya, that was the role played primarily by Hrithik Roshan and Preeti Zinta, and they talked a lot about extraterrestrial object that is called ET. So, directed by Rakesh Roshan, this kind of a film is a narrative, a storyline of a particular character who is known as Rohit, and who is not sound in mind and body, rather, he is a bit psychologically challenged young man. He is physically grown up, but not mentally. But we know that somehow he could get in touch with the aliens due to the help of his father's technology, and later he got some superpower through them, because one of the aliens was left on earth, and with the help of that alien, that mentally and the psychologically challenged young man, Rohit, ultimately gets a kind of a confidence, the kind of so-called quote unquote manliness that he lacked so long. That manliness he could revived from, and the film became very popular. People enjoyed the transformation of Rohit in the film, and Rohit's success was ultimately, as it was thought on the part of the audience's success. So Rohit has, of course, sequel that was known as Krish, because such kind of a film paved the way for another, science fiction film, or references of science fictions are very much there in, and the sequel of Koi Mil Gaya, and this one is Krish. So look how gradually in Indian context people were trying to get in touch with Indian science, Indian researchers, Indian scientists, and also at the same time people who are also getting benefited. So the ET and extraterrestrials, they are not always bad. They're not always often as it is presumed that they are more powerful than the people on the earth, and when they come to earth, their main target is primarily to destroy in human civilization. So the movie is a kind of a message with a very good fellow feeling that there is a very good contact, and those ET extraterrestrial objects, they are basically full of benevolence. So this friendship with the people of another planet, this is something is the primary concern of a film like this, Koi Mil Gaya. Rawan comes to another level. Rawan, starred by Shah Rukh Khan, Kareena Kapoor, and Arjun Rampal, and so many other characters. Rawan was, in a similar way, just like in case of the Hollywood movies, a big budget film, and that crudities, the complexities of the narrative, that is also very much there. The villain is, of course, there, and Rawan talks about of an environment that the world of gaming. Now, the world of gaming, that is a kind not only an event but also an intoxication of the young mind. It talks about of that intoxicated phase of that of a new generation, and that new generation who are very much interested to work on to do something or to be involved in that everyday gaming practices. Now Shah Rukh Khan's role was brilliant because Shah Rukh Khan, the way a robot or a man machine who should behave, just like a machine, we find Shah Rukh Khan to behave in a very similar fashion, and it's a memorable film, no doubt, for every audience because it talks a lot about some of the basic issues, that virtual world of gaming, and how one can get obsessed in that virtual world, and they talk with that issue, they drink with that issue, and they sleep with that issue. So Rawan, of course, talks of a new generation people and their habit of playing with games and to be obsessed with the games all the time. So it is, of course, should be considered as a film that is full of cautionary messages for the young generation. Now, I would like to refer one new filmmaker and who's recently made a film was in not in that sense very popular, okay, and this kind of a film that she made, Arti Kadav is the name. Arti Kadav, whose debut film was released on Netflix, and the name of the film is Cargo. But we know that the film didn't get well. Rather, it was a kind of a disastrous response. But the kind of observation that Arti has today as a filmmaker. Now, Arti's observation is, of course, necessary because it should keep in mind when we are reading science fiction films in the context of India. Now, what is Arti Kadav's observation? I quote from Arti. From my experience, the benchmark for science fiction are indeed these big budget Hollywood films, and their scale actually acts as a stumbling block, as it is tough for local producers to put that much amount of confidence in terms of money in any homegrown story. Also, the Hollywood narratives, superheroes, futuristic world, do not culturally fit in the Indian context, and the early films are very derivative and tacky imitations of these stories, and their failure was seen as the genre's failure. Now look that how the kind of money invested and the kind of narrative that we are generally introduced to while watching films of the Hollywood. Now, if such kind of futuristic films are also being made in Indian context, so it creates so many questions, it creates so many queries, and there are so many possibilities of getting a failure. And the very same kind of thing happened in the case of Arti Kadab. Salinder Vyas is another director of science fiction films and often science fiction TV series and those web series which are often telecast in the title JL50. Now, India is continuously experimenting, and new directors are coming in with their new kind of film. Now, now, Salinder Vass's observation is that if we think of that in a country like India, people are not very much aware of science fiction films, and they are in no way, if we think that they are in a position to enjoy, to celebrate, to think, to ponder upon science fiction films, it will be a kind of a serious mistake. And we shouldn't think in that particular way. Now, GL50 is a film that is based on some of the science fiction experiences, connection with India and science, and so many other related issues. So, Salinder Vyas is important in that sense because he breaks the binary. Okay, uh, he breaks the binary and paves the way for everyone who can have some imagination, who has the potentiality, so that they can be a part of science fiction films. Now, India is basically considered as a country that rejects logical science because because the tendency of logic and rationality that we don't find in Indian context. And in spite of having such kind of a struggle, when Bas could make a film successfully ultimately, so it creates a kind of an uproar. And through Vas's recommendations, we come to know that all those uncertainties, all those complexities, all those difficulties that a director had in India while making film based on science fiction. So gradually we are finding a kind of a change. Vas, of course, was not in that sense so very successful one, but a change is very much seen gradually. Nowadays, one thing that I would like to mention is the OTT format. Okay, and we all know that the OTT format, over the top media services. OTT stands for over the top media services. And now this particular platform, it is becoming more and more popular. And this platform invites so many fresh ideas, new observations. And now critics, they see that science fiction as a genre, uh, it's almost like be very popular if new videos, new films are being made and they are posted, they are released on the OTT platform. Now, this is how in Indian context we find there is chronic changes. Chronic changes. Before I conclude today, I would like to mention once again that particular film. This one is by Amir Khan, and this Amir Khan's film uh, talks a lot about again the connection between PK from this world on Earth and the another world. This science fiction film has categorically attempted to make a balance between the conditions on Earth and, of course, the entertainment that is required. The messages of humor dealing with religion. Uh, so many uproar and debates took place that Amir Khan didn't pay respect to other religions in the film PK. But at the same time, the kind of novelty of thought, the kind of new angle, because so many critics are there that they say that in India, people are not ready to think in that way, because what is very common, the futuristic attitude that is very common in case of Western culture, in Indian culture, where the basic needs are food, shelter, and people don't have a safe room at all at the end of the day. So how can they think of science fiction at all? So can they connect if an audience like from that representative, if he goes to watch the film in a cinema hall, can he or she be able to connect when he or she has problem with food, problem with shelter, problem to stay at night? So how can he or she connect the kind of science fiction environment? It is not at all possible. So India needs to go a long path. However, by this time, they have attempted to connect that science fiction message with Indian context. And the attempts are really commendable in spite of having such commendable responses. So, what our future will say, what our future will do is to go for, we the audience, we need to encourage our directors more and more so that they never getting disheartened. They should go making more films, new films on that particular genre that we call science fiction. Thank you so much for today's class.